Three, two, one. Hello, everyone. Dondre Homer here. Welcome to the DHomerRealestate podcast. Today is the beginning of season 2. Before we get started, I hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, download, write a review to help the algorithm. As mentioned, today is the launch of season 2, and I wanted to start off with a bang. Now, I have a special individual here from the US of A, Austin, Texas. This individual started investing in real estate in 2019 with a duplex. He quit his 6-figure salary job to start a recruiting firm and a real estate investing firm back in January 2020. He started investing in large apartments complexes within the same year, and currently now has over 950 units in his portfolio, passive and active. And the individual that I'm talking about is the owner of Great Venture Capital, Justin Dixion. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. It's going to be fun.
This is going to be very fun because I have a lot of questions for you. But before we get into it, I always start off with icebreakers. I guess this is like a tradition with the DHomerRealestate podcast. And it's just 3 questions and, answer it. So the guests get to see who you are and, get to know you better and myself. So
Sure.
The first question I have for you is, what was the most impactful book you have read?
Hands down, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If you have a lot of real estate people on the show, I'm sure that's consistent. But yeah, that was definitely a mind shift book for me. Like, I've read a lot of business, self-help, motivational books, and they're all the same. You get kind of bits and pieces out of it. But I read that book, and that's kind of, we'll probably talk about this a little later, but that's kind of one of the reasons why, or the kicks in the butt that I needed to kind of shift my mindset to move into becoming an entrepreneur and not, kind of leaving the W-2 world. So yeah, definitely Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yes, awesome. I guess that book is like the beginning of everything. Rich Dad,
Yeah.
I feel like every entrepreneur, every business person, investor, that's the first book that they have to read. And I remember me reading that book, and I read it within I think it was 2 days because I was so excited about learning. So it was
once you get sucked in, you're like, wait, there's a whole different way to think and do things and invest in yourself and all that fun stuff. It was a mindset shift for sure.
Absolutely. Now, the second question I have for you now is, where is your dream vacation spot? Like a place you've never been that your dream?
Bali. Yeah, I've never been to Bali. Always looks very cool and very low key and, very fresh and yoga-y and just chill. So definitely Bali's on the bucket list for sure.
Fresh and yoga-y. I like that.
Yeah. Yoga-y.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last question, because in the intro, I did mention that you started investing back in January 2020. And that was kind of like the brink, or just a couple months before, the world completely changed. So I just want to know, what lessons did you learn within these past 2 years?
It's a good question. And, there's a lot to pull out over the last 2 years. And I think a couple things that I really learned were, don't give up, because there were a lot of times in 2020, leaving a very secure job where, I didn't know the world was going to change a few months later, and definitely had mindset, thoughts of hey, maybe I should just quit and go back to stability. Right. So not quitting, but then also surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded really helped me kind of get through some of the darker days of, I started a recruiting business and a real estate business in January of 2020. So, recruiting was not a great time in 2020. It's definitely changed over the last year and a half for sure, for the better. But yeah, just surrounding yourself with people that are farther along in the journey than you are, maybe have seen some of the ups and downs of life, and have plugged through those ups and downs. That definitely was, one of the main drivers of keeping me going. And, obviously, and also I've got a very supportive and helpful wife and all that fun stuff. So, yeah, I definitely think keep going, one foot in front of the other. Don't try to compare yourself, your chapter 1 to somebody's chapter 12. So, we're all in a different journey at different times. So yeah, those are some of the things I definitely pulled out of the last 2 years.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. And again, it's the same thing for me, not quitting and, 1 foot at a time. Right. And again, comparison, I think that's a very
Yeah.
thing that a lot of people struggle with. But you know what, if you just focus on you, you have something special in your life. So yeah, that's all of the icebreaker questions. I want to thank you for
Cool.
answering.
No,
Now,
no worries.
Scholars is an education center where we help students maximize their truest potential.
With more of that one-on-one focus, smaller class sizes, individual attention, doesn't matter your age, your grade, what subject you're in, Scholars has a program for you.
now I want to give you the opportunity to actually, introduce yourself and, formally introduce yourself.
Yeah, no. So Justin Dixion, I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a very, very small town, fell into the recruiting world back in 2006 when I graduated college, and have been doing recruiting in one form or fashion ever since. So over 15 years in the business, worked for startups, worked for large Fortune 30 companies, et cetera, et cetera. And then back in 2018, my wife and I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Mm-hmm. And that was a little bit of as I mentioned, a mindset shift, especially for me in the beginning, because I listened to the book on Audible. I was a big Audible fan because I was walking to and from work. I worked in Center City, Philadelphia. So I got a opportunity to walk a lot. And so I gave the book to my wife. I said, hey, you got to read this, because my mindset had already shifted to, I want to invest in real estate. I think we should, be investing in ourselves. I've always had the idea of starting my own business, et cetera. And so I gave her the book on a hope that she would have the same mindset shift. And luckily she did, because that could have been a bit of a unique conversation if she was like, no, I don't believe in real estate or whatever. So luckily she would have the same reaction I did of like, what the heck are we doing? So that was 2018. And then 2019, we bought our first duplex. I didn't want to start with single family. I wanted to spread my risk around to having multiple units. Yeah. But wasn't prepared mentally to go up to, 10, 20 or 100 units at that point. So we looked in Philly, couldn't find anything, found something actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My mom grew up there, so I have some affinity with the area and everything like that. And then, we were W-2 workers. We weren't making, oodles and oodles of money. We were, living very comfortably, but we didn't have the capital to keep putting 25% down on, duplexes. Right. And so that's when, we listened to a lot of Bigger Pockets. And so, that was a podcast that we listened to. And, I was very intrigued by the people that were doing the big syndications and raising money and, taking down these 100, 200, 300 unit apartment complexes. And so I really kind of kept coming back to that idea. And so that's when in kind of mid to late 2019, I started really digging into the syndication world, realized very quickly that it's way different to analyze a 100-unit apartment complex than it is a duplex, right? So yep. I realized I needed to find some mentors, some coaching, some people that were already doing it, that could help me. And then in 2020, the goal was to quit my W-2 job. Again, I had a very cushy job. I was a head of recruiting for a mid-sized company in Philadelphia, making good money. And so January was the date that I was going to quit and start my own recruiting business, thinking that would give me, figuring that I have the network in Philadelphia and I can just essentially do that on the side while I'm really focusing on real estate, because real estate was really kind of the engine that I thought would be the long-term for us to generate passive income and all that. Yeah. Jumped out and, took the leap and started both recruiting in a real estate business and joined a mentorship group in real estate. So that was good. And I had a lot of time on my hands because recruiting wasn't very busy in 2020. Yeah. So I just took that opportunity to learn the syndication world. I analyzed well over 200 deals that year, put in a bunch of offers, didn't get any deals, unfortunately, but I learned a lot. We passively invested in a deal, and because I wanted to really understand how it all worked, because it's way different, kind of taking down and investing in what is a business in all reality, is a big syndication. And then, so up until now, we've invested in, I think 6 total investments. We've raised capital on 2 of them. And so, we're pushing to get to over 1,000 units in the next probably 2 months, passive and active. We've got over 350 or 340 active, so that we're general partners on those deals. So yeah, things have been really crazy over the last 2 years. The lows of COVID in 2020 and the highs of the last year and a half. So,
Right. Yeah.
Knock on wood, it all continues.
Hopefully things have just got lifted off here in Canada. So,
Okay.
yeah, so things are just, gradually growing and coming back to normalcy. So hopefully
Right.
stay on this.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, right. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that I want to unpack with your story, and I do want to touch on with just the jump, because I just feel like you had a comfortable job, making six figures, and just to jump like that it's mind blowing, because I know some people who are afraid to make that leap. And I'm curious to know how that was for you. So you mentioned that you were in the recruiting world. So I want to know, like, how was that? Like, what got you into it? What was it that, I guess, intrigued you about it?
Yeah, so the recruiting world, I literally fell into out of college. I graduated in 2006, so the economy was still good. And I liked the HR, human resources world. I took a class in college, and I knew that recruitment was part of the HR world, right? And so I saw this recruiter job for this big company, and I was like, hey, that looks fun. Not realizing at the time that it was really a sales job, and that was the path. You started as a recruiter, and then you grew up into like a sales executive, et cetera. Yeah. And it was a big staffing firm, and I kind of just fell into it, loved it. And, you can make a lot of money in it. Unfortunately, I was kind of on the growth path at the company, and then 07, 08 hit, and just pulled the rug right out from underneath us. Yeah. But it taught me to kind of just keep going, and I ended up, I was living in York, Pennsylvania at that time, which is a small kind of town-ish in southern Pennsylvania. And then I always wanted to live in a big city, so I made the move to Philly. And so I've worked kind of on the staffing side, so the external vendor that provides recruitment. And then I've also worked internally at a company, again, both small and very large. So I kind of just fell into it and never I thought about kind of moving into a different part of HR when I was at Comcast, which is a massive employer in Philly, but also in the US. And it never kind of panned out. So I just kind of stayed in the recruitment world. And then I got recruited out by this wealth management firm to be their head of recruiting. So I was like, okay, well, it's a promotion. I'm the head kind of recruiter guy, and they pay me decent money, and so that was fine. And the kind of pivot was reading the book, right? Reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, kind of having that mindset shift away from investing in 401ks and relying on the security of a W-2 job, because everybody thinks that W-2 jobs are secure. And, I've recruited and been in very large companies that you are a number on a line item, right? And so if the economy tanks or a division isn't doing well, whether you're a good person or a good hire or not, you may be, asked to leave because your position was eliminated or your team was reorganized. And so, being your own boss, you have risk, obviously, but you also have a little bit more control. So I kind of was like, okay, well, I've always wanted to do my own thing. That was kind of the ultimate goal in my head, but my wife and I are very, very risk averse. And so we took 2019 really as an opportunity to downgrade our lifestyle. So we owned a condo in Philadelphia. We decided to move out to the suburbs and move into a smaller apartment. We rented out our condo, so we were generating a little bit of income from that rental. We had the duplex out in Pittsburgh that was doing well. And, I was always a saver. I grew up in a small town, like I mentioned. My dad worked for an industrial manufacturing company in Pennsylvania, and he worked there for 30 years. And my upbringing was a great upbringing, but it was very much, pay your bills, budget, invest in your 401k, right? Get a good job, kind of a thing. And that was the investment advice. And so that's what I was doing. And so I was always a saver. I always budgeted really well. And so I had some savings. My wife was like, you should do this. Let's take the risk. And she had a great job at the time. And So we felt secure, and we downgraded our lifestyle enough that her salary could cover our lifestyle, our living expenses, right? So we weren't pulling money out of savings to live, to pay rent or anything like that. Her salary was covering it, which was, a very big help in 2020 when the economy, tanked.
Yeah.
So we were both sitting down, and it took a few months to really, get the courage to say, okay, January, I can't remember the date. I think it was the 17th. I was going to go into my boss's office and say, I'm putting in my notice, and, I'm not going to a secure other job. I'm starting my own business. And the other piece that I'll mention is I had the very lucky pleasure of, I was able to do some consulting on the side. So I worked for a W-2 company. They recruited me out of my previous job, and I had said to them that I had already started an LLC a couple of years ago because I did some consulting on the side when I worked for a startup. And I said, hey, I have a few clients that have been asking for, some help. I'd love to help them on my own time. And they were okay with that. So luckily I had a little bit of runway, kind of coming out of 2019. I had a couple of clients that I was talking to and working with. So luckily I didn't start at zero. Right. And so I know a lot of people, when you start your own business and leave the W-2, you may not have the luxury of being able to start a business on the side and get it to a point where you've got some momentum. Right. And so, so that gave me also a little bit of security jumping out, knowing that I had a few clients that I was working with. But as I mentioned, the goal was not to build a large recruiting business. The goal was to recruit on the side, pay, save some money by recruiting and use that money to invest in real estate. That was ultimately the goal. Obviously plans change when COVID hits and, 2020 happens, but, yeah, so that was kind of a little bit of a longer winded answer, but that was kind of the progression that I made from, getting into the recruiting world and then making that shift, kind of in late 2019 to really say, okay, I'm going to do it. My wife and I we're in it for the long haul. And we took the jump.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, you mentioned that, being, a W-2 worker, it's again, it's secure, but it's not really secure because at the end of the day, if, your line or whatever the case may be is slowing down, they can cut you off. And then you mentioned that like being your own boss, you have that more control over, the situation. So would you say that was like the main driving factor to push you to start your own business, or?
I think it was part of it, right? I think, I've seen so many good, really hardworking people at, various companies get laid off for no fault of their own, right? And that is a shock to the system that they did not anticipate, right? They're coming into work on a Friday and they're like, hey, I'm, making good money. I've got a family and kids and vacation plans and all this stuff. And then, your company says, hey, sorry, but, you're no longer needed here in this role. And, that's devastating to some people, especially if they don't have the savings that luckily Allison and I did. So, there's a lot of reasons why it kind of started to kind of manifest into okay, I need to start this business. But so controlling my own destiny was a little bit of kind of a driving factor, but also I wanted to own my own time. That was a bigger piece of it where, when you're working in W-2, this is pre-COVID, right? So I was in an office 5 days a week. And, when you're there, even if you're not totally focused on the job, you're kind of accountable to and have to be somewhat plugged in, because if your boss walks by or, their boss's boss and all that stuff, you've got to be, ready to answer questions. Whereas I wanted to be able to sit at my desk at my house and focus on the things I wanted to focus on. And part of that was going to be building a sustainable recruiting business that would generate income, right? Active income. But then I could take that active income and invest it passively into real estate. And so the goal was always to take back my time, right? As an entrepreneur, you kind of dictate what you do. And, you can work 100 hours a week, you can work 40 hours a week, you can work 20 hours a week, whatever you want. And so then I was kind of saying, okay, I want to take part of my time and focus on recruiting, part of my time and focus on real estate. And that's kind of what I did.
Okay. I like that. I like that. Now I want to go back to, your wife. You mentioned her name, Allison.
Yep.
And I want you to touch on the importance of having that support, because I feel like you were very lucky to have, someone who was able to essentially take over the fort as you take that leap. Can you touch on the importance of having, someone who's so supportive of your dream, so supportive of your goals, and is willing to, I guess, not compromise, but is willing to, adjust life with you. So can you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, totally. And it's a massive benefit that, obviously if you're single, you may not have that. You may have that in your parents and things like that. But, again, go back to, we are very risk averse. So when I thought about quitting, it was, a very weird taste in my mouth to say those words or think about that stuff. Yeah. And, we just kind of did the math, right? And so, okay, if I fill X number of positions per year, that'll cover my salary that I walk away from. And, again, we downgraded our lifestyle, and yes, Allison was totally on board with everything. She saw the long game, right? Sometimes you kind of get so close in what's right in front of you. You don't think about, okay, well, let's take a year of downgrading our lives, living in a smaller apartment. We went from a 2-bed, 2-bath condo to a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment. So, the size of the apartment got smaller, but we weren't living in a 1-bedroom again. We weren't eating, hot dogs and ice cubes for dinner, or anything like that. So, but we consciously made the mindset shift of saying, okay, we only have one car. We're not going to get a second. Mm-hmm. We're going to not go out as much. We're going to maybe not go on vacation this year, or maybe not do a full, we used to go to like Aruba every year, as our kind of week vacation. So maybe we won't do that this year, depending on how things go. So we made conscious decisions to say, and it wasn't like I was saying, you need to do this or I'm going to do that. It was very much what do we need to do in order for it to, and the whole reason why we did this was to give us as long of a runway as possible. Yep. So that if something bad happened, we never anticipated COVID, but if something bad happened where, our worst case scenario was I wouldn't like it, or I wouldn't fill as many positions as fast as I thought I could. And so the money wasn't going to start coming in until 6 months, 8 months. Right. And so luckily that didn't happen, but also we had the savings enough to get us through. We could have lived a year and not dipped in. Well, we could have lived kind of forever because Allison's salary covered our rent and all that fun stuff. But even if things happened even more drastic than it did, and she lost her job, we would have been fine and living our normal lives for probably 6 to 8 months without having to really like trim our lifestyle. Yeah. Right. So, but I go back to the fact that she was fully on board. She was pushing me to do it. It wasn't like I was the driving force. It was definitely a joint effort, if you will. And it was a massive help because, 2020, there were some dark days where I would think about like, what the heck did I do, to not only my career, but our lives. Yeah. Right. And that's, if you take a big financial hit, it takes typically some time to get out of that hole. Mm-hmm. And luckily we didn't dig ourselves a hole. She maintained her job throughout COVID. We actually moved down to Austin in October of 2020. Okay. She got a great job down here. And our lives are infinitely better down here. The weather's better, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so, again, a little bit of a long-winded answer, but, having that support, whether it's your wife or your friends or your family, mm-hmm. is massive when you're trying to do something that is outside the norm, right? Mm-hmm. Because 99% of people, W-2, white picket fence, 2.5 kids, 2 cars in the garage, et cetera, which is totally fine. Mm-hmm. But there is, there is other options. There are other options to living a different lifestyle. And so we were both on board, and we're still on board today. And I think we've got a plan set in place that in the next 4 years, assuming again, nothing drastic negatively happens, that, we'll be able to not have to work mm-hmm. because we'll have so much passive income coming in from real estate and other investments that it will offset our living expenses. So, that was kind of the impetus really is I don't want to work for the next 30, 40 years, right? Mm-hmm. I want to bust my butt for the next 5 to 10, retire, retire. And, I've got income coming in, even though I'm not actively working. That's a big difference between passive and active income, right? So, yeah, hopefully that answered. But yeah, it was massive help. I mean, massive support for sure.
Most definitely. And again, shout out to your wife, for
100%.
great support. How long did it take for you to actually plan to actually like leave your job?
7 years, reality. That was probably about the time that I started the business, officially, and then actually, quit. But no, I think really it was, I took the job to set us up because I anticipated that I would stay at that job for 2 or 3 years, right? Because I only was there about a little over a year, which wasn't my intention. My intention was to be there for 2 or 3 years. I wanted to build up a nest egg of cash because her and I were both making good money at that point, so that the runway was longer. But 2019 was a good economy. Things were growing. People were hiring. And so I was like, okay, well, let's do this now. Because I'm a procrastinator also. So if I procrastinate, 2 years could lead into 10. Yep. And then I could wake up and, be 10 years older and be like, well, crap, I just, didn't do anything. And now my salary is so high that it's hard to think about replacing it. Right. So, and I was not a big earner. I wasn't, I made just over $100,000. So it wasn't like I was making $500,000, so, so it definitely was probably a 4 month of hard discussions, decisions, but, I would say probably a year, maybe 6 months, because that's when we were like, okay, well, let's move to the suburbs. Let's downgrade our lives. Like that was the whole kind of stepping stones in the path of progress. And then it was just a matter of me getting up the courage to go into my boss's office and say, here's my notice. So that was very difficult, to say the least. That was we shared a wall. So I had to walk around the wall to get to his office. And that was a very long walk. My heart was pounding for sure.
Yeah, sweating. It's like, wow.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm about to make the jump. That's amazing. So looking back at everything, preparing to, make that jump, is there anything specific, that you would do differently when you look back in time that you would change?
Yeah, I think, one, I probably would have done it earlier. I probably would have done it, years earlier. Because like I said, I started the business, I had the idea to do it. But life is about timing, and, I wasn't prepared mentally, mature. I probably wasn't as mature. I'm still not super mature, but I wasn't as mature as I was, to make that decision. And I think my wife and I weren't mentally in that mindset, right? We were in the at that point we were like, let's buy a condo, let's buy a house for ourselves and, do that lifestyle. But, so I would start earlier, but also I think I would have put some more rigor around the process. I had the entity, I had all the things that I needed, and a recruiting business to start is very low barrier to entry, very easy to do. You literally just need a laptop and an LLC, and you can say you're a recruiter. You don't need any credentials. If you've got a network of people that you can say, hey, I'll help you find an accountant or a salesperson or whatever the position is, you can start a staffing firm. So, but I would have put a little bit more rigor around my time and my time management skills. And so, balancing the pull of the recruiting world right now, which is super busy, I can make a lot of money in recruiting, and balancing that effort and time, but also focusing on, raising money for real estate deals. I'm still looking at real estate deals. I live in Texas. Texas is a amazing market to invest in, which also means it's very, very competitive. So it's very difficult to find a deal. And so, so those are some things I probably would have thought about a little bit more if hindsight or Monday morning quarterback, whatever you want to call it. But
That's awesome. Now I kind of want to transition into just, your upbringing, because I was going through your website and I was reading your bio. Just I guess that the front part really hit my eye, right? And you mentioned, and I quote, having grown up watching my parents faithfully faithful to their employers, practicing the old school financial mindset of saving and budgeting to create wealth. I've seen firsthand how hard you can work your entire life only to miss out on great opportunities to sustain growth and grow your wealth. So I kind of want to touch on, a little bit about, your background, like where you come from and how was your childhood like?
Yeah. No, I mean, I grew up on a small farm, not very big in by kind of farm standards. It was 10 acres, but we had chickens and pigs, and we had a sheep at one point, and ducks and rabbits and cats, and we had a dog. And so it was kind of but we weren't farmers. We didn't farm the land. We had 7 acres that was farmable, but we would lease it out to local farmers that, they could put whatever crop they wanted to in there. But we had this really cool, little house. So I grew up outside, right? Doing, all the things. I would take care of the chickens. We, on Sunday mornings, we'd get up and go, before we went to church, we'd go get fresh eggs and, have breakfast and then, go to church and all that stuff. And, I was naive at that time because I would, we'd raise these chickens from peeps, and then they, a couple months or whatever down the road, they would be all gone, and we'd have a freezer full of chickens. So I didn't know where that came from, right? Obviously I do now, but so it was a great upbringing. At the time, I wasn't excited about it because I always had in my mind, I wanted to work and live in a big city. Like I have no idea what I want to do in my life, but I said I wanted to be in business. I always wanted to be in business, and whatever the heck that meant as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, whatever. So when I graduated college, and I went to a college, an hour away from my hometown, so I didn't go super far, but I always knew I was never going to move back to my hometown, because if I did, I would have gotten stuck. And stuck is a negative for me. I know a lot of people that still live there. They love their lives, and that's totally fine. I just didn't have that as my journey. Yeah. And so I moved in with a buddy of mine who lived in New York, PA, as I mentioned, and then ultimately made my way to Philadelphia. But, my dad worked for the same company for 33 years. The only reason why he left was the plant shut down. And, luckily I was in the recruiting business, so I could actually help him to write a resume and, prepare for interviews. And so, because he was not at the point where he was going to retire. Yeah. And so he ended up getting another job and all that fun stuff. My mom, she was stay at home for a bunch of years while my sister and I were growing up, and I have an older sister. And then, she was a preschool teacher, and I didn't realize this at the time, but she was kind of the entrepreneur of the family. Because she was, even though it wasn't a true entrepreneur adventure, but she was a preschool teacher in a local community center, and she was essentially running her own preschool. And again, didn't really realize it at the time, but that was, my first kind of venture or first kind of exposure to some type of you don't work for like a big company, right? My dad worked for a big company. Everybody I knew worked for other companies. And so, but my dad was a saver. We weren't a wealthy family. We had enough. We went on vacations each year. We had nice things. I played sports. My sister played sports. So we had, I played soccer. And so we had the new cleats and, gear and all that fun stuff. But, my dad mainly was not he didn't buy things for himself. Right. So he was always saying, hey, I don't need a new pair of sneakers. The kids need new things, and let them do that. So, I grew up in a saving, budgeting family, and that really resonated with me. When I got my first job, picking fruit on a fruit farm and working in a golf shop, I was, I'd make a couple bucks. I'd spend probably 10% of it, and the rest would go in the bank. I was very much don't spend the money. Don't spend the money. Because I was always just like, I want to save, and I liked seeing the bank account grow. Right. And so even though I had the money to buy a new bike or whatever, when I was younger, I never did, because I didn't want to see that bank account go down. So I kind of kept that. And I've kept a budget, literally an Excel doc, that I've kept since 2006 when I graduated college. And I can still go back, which, crazy. And I can still go back and see what I made and what I spent on things back in 2006. And I've done that ever since. And that's helped me to, bring some, stability to my wife and I's lives. We're not as strict on the budget as we used to be, but
Mhm.
years ago, if I bought a pack of gum at the grocery store, I'd write down $2, pack of gum, boom,
Oh,
out the
wow.
expenses. So, so it's a bit extreme to some people, but it was normal for me. And luckily, my wife is not a massive spender, or she's not a big shopper or anything like that. And again, I think we met at the right time in our lives, and we met, got married, or got engaged a year later and got married a year after that. So, we kind of moved fairly quickly in our courtship, if you will. But my childhood was great. It was I was outside a lot. I learned the things that I learned about financial kind of security, but I didn't really learn the growth mindset. It was more of a scarcity. Keep everything you've got. Don't invest it.
Yeah.
Don't take risk necessarily. And that stayed with me until Rich Dad Poor Dad literally flipped the script, and it was a different mindset from there on.
Yeah, I was about to ask, like, at what point did you realize that system of, like, saving and, this proper, like, budgeting, like, would not allow you to truly grow? Like, was it that exact, seminar or conference that you went to that kind of like flipped the switch on, okay, yes, I'm budgeting and I'm saving, I'm doing great things with my money, but I'm not able to grow or like truly grow wealth like this way? Like, what was that actual flip?
I think it was almost Rich Dad Poor Dad, because I was seeing reinforcement around me by my peers. And I'll give you a quick example. That what I was doing was right, in the sense that I was working for, it was probably 09, probably 09.
Mhm.
I was in Philadelphia, and I had a buddy who was like, hey, we were doing the same job at the same company. We just had different sales territories. And he was like, hey, can you come to lunch with this client? I want to introduce you to this client. I was like, sure. He's like, oh, can you pay for it? I was like, what do you mean? Like, we get reimbursed. Like, just put it on your credit card. We get reimbursed. He's like, oh, I've already maxed out 2 of my credit cards.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, dude, like, what are you doing? Right. So, my mindset of like saving and paying off I never carried a balance on a credit card. I still don't. So it's like, I pay it off every month. And so the thought process of like having debt and like having like credit card debt or like not having money in the bank scared the crap out of me. And so that's why it was just reinforcing my mindset of like, okay, I'm doing the right things. Just keep doing this. You're going to be fine. You're going to get the house. You're going to get the cars and whatever. And I still have the nest egg. Like, I still have the 6-8 months of living expenses. So if crap hits the fan, we've got cash in the bank.
Yeah.
Now with inflation, obviously that amount is going down, but I still have, and I'll never not have a certain amount of money liquid in a bank.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's just that part of my brain is never going to go away. But the other part, the kind of risky part, the investment part, the wealth building, wow, I see that if I invest this money in this asset, I'm going to get in my sleep, people are going to pay me money. Right. And so, that's the side of my brain that I'm starting to really lean into over the last 3 years, is taking some of that money that I've made, that my wife and I have made, that we've saved, and put it into things that are going to generate wealth. And we still put money in the stock market. There are people that I talk to that are real estate focused, that only invest in real estate. And I'm not there. I think there's a part of your portfolio that should be in some type of a risky asset, like the market or Bitcoin or crypto, whatever you want to invest in, which I'm not an expert in by any means. But but I think real estate's my game right now, because it will pay you passive income. Like, I look at my stock portfolio every month and I'm like, well, last month was great, it went up. Well, this month was crap, it went down. Right. But it doesn't, it puts net worth, builds my net worth, assuming the market goes up. Yeah. But it doesn't pay me anything. So, in Rich Dad Poor Dad, people talk about their house, their primary residence, as, is it an asset or liability? It's a liability because it doesn't generate you any income. Right. And so that was a mindset shift for me, where my wife and I still don't own a house. We live in an apartment, and people would say, well, that's stupid because you're just paying for somebody else's mortgage. And that's true. But I also have the flexibility. And if something breaks, I don't fix it. Somebody else fixes it. I can move. Like, so it's kind of like, there's more than a few ways to do things, and there's no right way. My wife and I have just found that, moving forward and investing the money that we make into experiences. So we still go on vacations. We still do the things we want to do. We still live a great life. We also invest in something that's going to generate wealth for us and income for us, because we're going to live on that at some point in the future. So,
yeah. I like that. I like that. And I guess you are part of the Grant Cardone philosophy of, your primary residence. You do not own, you rent it, and then you invest in real estate, which when I first heard it, I was like, what? I was kind of confused. I'm like, why are we doing this? But then as you said, again, if something breaks, hello, landlord, me, please fix this.
right.
And that is something that doesn't come out of your pocket, which is great. You're able to and then the flexibility, you're able to move out within a year, 2 years, whatever you guys would like. So again, that Grant Cardone, when I first got introduced to it, I was confused, but now understanding it, especially the cost of living here in Canada, Toronto, the GTA is out of this world, right?
Oh,
so,
yeah.
So I can.
Yeah, no, and it actually was the Grant Cardone conversation he had with somebody. I don't remember where I saw it. He's like, you don't need to live in a home that you pay for. You can rent an apartment and invest in real estate. You still get the tax benefits of investing in real estate, right? Even as a passive investor, you get the wealth creation, you get the appreciation, all that fun stuff. But you don't, and that's why, when I talk to people and I'm talking to them about raising money or investing in deals, I'm asking them to put a lot of money into a real estate investment. And the thing I've got to kind of talk to them about is like, you're not investing in Justin. Like you're not giving me your money, right? I'm not a hedge fund where I take it and I do whatever I want with it. I bring you a deal and I say, here's where the deal is, why we think it's a good deal, what the returns are going to look like, how long we're going to hold it, et cetera. And then, I explain to them why I think it's an interesting opportunity. And if it works, then they put money into that business, because it is a business that they're investing in. 100 unit apartment complexes have their own staff, they have their own payroll, they have their own expenses and everything. So once people start thinking about like, you're not giving Justin money, right? You're not giving me money. I'm giving you an opportunity to look at a deal and invest in a deal. And if it makes sense based on, what your kind of goals and portfolio needs are, then let's rock and roll. So,
awesome.
But yeah.
Awesome. I like that. And I guess let's dive into, Great Venture Capital. I love the name. Where did you get the name, by the way? I'm just curious.
So, so we worked with a firm, a marketing company, and we were spitballing about things. And I always wanted it to be like, I like to be outdoors, even though I don't get outdoors as much as I would like nowadays because I'm inside working all the time. But, my wife and I, we golf, we hike, we like to be, at the beach and things like that. And so, we want to help people build passive income so they can live their adventure, whatever that adventure is. Whether that's, owning a home and living in the burbs, owning a condo downtown, or buying a small farm out in the middle of nowhere. Right. And so whatever that adventure is, we feel that real estate is a good vehicle, or at least a wheel on your vehicle to help you get there. And that's kind of why we've started the business, and we rebranded it Great Venture Capital, and, we've invested in deals, and we've helped people invest in other deals. And so, we want to help people live their own adventure, and it doesn't have to be ours, right? It doesn't have to be our path. It doesn't have to be our journey. It can be theirs. And we think that real estate's a vehicle that can help you get there.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Now, again, Great Venture Capital. Can you please explain to the listeners, what is it and how exactly does it work? So you mentioned that it is a real estate firm and you present deals, but can you elaborate a little bit more on exactly what that means and how it works?
Yeah, so we are a syndicator, a real estate syndicator. So essentially what happens is I'm part of a large syndication group. There's about 120 of us in this group that are all like-minded individuals that are across the US. And there are people in the group that are more focused on finding opportunities, finding deals. So they're out there meeting with brokers, underwriting deals, doing property tours, et cetera, which I do some of. And then there's other people that bring the capital, bring the money to the deal, right? Because when you are buying a $20 million, $10 million, $20 million asset, you get debt on it, right? You get a mortgage or a bridge loan or something, and they'll typically give you between 75 and 80% of the purchase price. But then you've got to bring that other amount of equity to the deal, right? So you've got to raise money from people in order to take down a deal. So that's where I come in. If I'm raising money on a deal, I will work with the deal finders or the operators in the group and say, hey, what deals are you working on? What capital do you need? And then they give me kind of their underwriting. So that's why I spent all of 2020 learning how to underwrite these deals, because it's complicated, right? If I showed you the spreadsheet that has 20 tabs of like how to actually analyze these deals, it's intimidating for sure, until you get to know. And so that's why I underwrite the deal. Once they send to me, I look at their underwriting and I kind of re-underwrite it, because we all use, and that's why I like the group that I'm in, we all use the same methodology, the terminology, and the same analyzer, the same tool to underwrite these deals. So I can look at an analyzer, even if I don't know anything about the market, don't know anything about the deal, I can look at it and say, okay, they're aggressive on this area, they're conservative here. Oh, I see why they did that, all that stuff, right? So I take that information and I review it, and then I say, okay, I like this deal. I'm investing in this deal.
Yeah.
I want to bring this to my investors. And so what I do is I record a short video that kind of outlines what the deal is, where it is, what our business plan is, what the returns are, and some other information. And then I send it to my investors and say, hey, and I present it to them. If they want to invest and learn more, they schedule a call with me. We talk through kind of what the steps in the process are.
Yeah.
I answer questions if they have specific questions about the business plan or about the underwriting or something like that. And if I don't know it, I go back to the guys and gals that do and get that information. And then there's typically a minimum investment, per deal that ranges from typically 50 to 100,000.
Yeah.
And then, we have them sign, because when we start an LLC for every deal. So you are literally buying into a business.
Yeah.
So you get shares, limited partnership shares of that business, depending on how much you invest. And that's where, we have a legal document that you sign. It's a private placement memorandum, PPM, that you review. It's 100 pages or something like that. And you invest in that business. And then we hold the properties for 5 to 6 years.
Okay.
And throughout that hold period, you're going to get, cash flow. You're going to get any type of distribution based on if we do a refinance. And then you're also going to get, a distribution once we sell the deal. So and also you get the tax benefits, you get wealth appreciation, all that extra. So that's kind of the very short version of how it works. And, a lot of people, when I talk to them about real estate, they're like, oh, I'm not accredited, or it's only for the rich, ultra rich. And, there's, not to get too technical, but there's two types of syndications that you can do, a 506B or a 506C. And the main difference, the way I explain it to people, is 506C, that's Grant Cardone. You can advertise, you can only bring in accredited investors.
Yeah.
And it's, not necessarily a bigger deal or a better deal. It's just, that's how they structure it. 506B, we can have up to 35 sophisticated investors, which just means that you don't earn enough money to be accredited, or you don't have a net worth to be accredited, but you can still invest in this deal, assuming that you have a relationship with the general partner, myself, or who else is raising money on that deal. So not to get too technical, I'm happy to talk more about that if people have questions, but yeah, there's two types of syndications that you can do. 506Bs we can't advertise, so I have to know who you are and know your risk capabilities and all that before you can get into a deal. So
absolutely.
Sorry to take that too technical.
No, I like it. I think it's you explained it very well. So since getting into real estate, I've seen a lot more of these, real estate firms and, people getting into it. And essentially, let's say if you have capital, you're able to then put some money into these things like private lending, right? Now, the biggest fear that I hear from a lot of people who may have, some capital, they're hardworking, they still their 9-to-5 job, and, they hear about these things is, they don't want to get scammed, or they're afraid of losing their money. So I have two questions that I feel like will kind of alleviate that stress off of them. So the first question is, how does an individual vet a company before putting their money in?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing and one of the main reasons why I only raise money at the moment for people within the syndication group that I'm in, because you've got to invest money to be in the group.
Yep.
We all are taught and by the same guy. There's one main guy that he's been doing this for years. He's got things up to 13,000 doors that he owns under management. So he's been doing it for a while, and he's got a really good track record. He's got curriculum that you can go through so you can learn the whole process. So that's the biggest, because everybody can make a deal look good on paper, right? And there's a lot of syndicators out there that are more aggressive than others. And we are categorically a more conservative group when we underwrite deals. That means we lose a lot of deals because people are bidding higher than us because they're more aggressive. I would rather lose a deal, not get a deal, than get a deal that doesn't work. Yeah. Right? Because one bad deal could ruin your reputation or tarnish it pretty significantly. So for you as a passive investor out there, you need to make sure that the capital raiser, me, the person that's kind of bringing you those deals, and you need to trust them that I'm vetting the deal well enough, right? So you almost have to vet a few people or a few kind of parts of the process to make people feel comfortable. So I have friends that if I bring them a deal and I say, hey, I'm investing in this deal, they're like, cool, I'm in. Where do I sign? Because they trust me that I've vetted the process. They've seen me go through the last 2 years of my evolution and my knowledge. But then there's people, like I'm talking to people now that are like, I don't know who you are. I don't know this group. Like, talk me. And so I've got to show them more data. I've got to talk to them more often. I've got to bring them a deal and show them kind of how it all works. And maybe they don't invest in that deal. And then they, maybe 6 months later, I bring them another deal. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go now because I've seen you post things. I've seen you on podcasts. I've seen you talk. Yeah. And I think, I'm ready to put some capital up. And the other thing to think about is, versus the stock market. And again, I'm not a stock market guru or accounting advisor or anything like that. Yeah. But if you invest $50,000 into real estate versus investing $50,000 into Bitcoin could go to zero and you lose all your money. Yeah. Even if real estate flattens and doesn't keep increasing or whatever, people are still paying rent and you're invested in a physical asset. So you can still sell that asset. Maybe you sell it for a loss, less than what you paid for, but you're still going to get some money back more likely than not. Right. So there are definitely bad deals out there. Yeah. But the odds of you walking away from losing $50,000 or whatever money you put in is small. It's not zero, but it's smaller than, putting it into a stock, which you have no control over too, right? Yeah. Like if you have questions about how a deal is performing, which we send you monthly reports and monthly data where you can call me and be like, dude, what's going on? Why is rent not increasing what we thought? Why is the PM not, on track from a renovation standpoint, et cetera? You can't call Bitcoin and say what's going on, right? You can't call Comcast CEO and say what's happening if you invest in Comcast. I'm not an advocate for Comcast. I'm not a advisor or anything like that. But so I hope that helps. But you got to really trust and know the people who are bringing you deals. Because again, there's a ton of capital raisers and syndicators out there, and you just have to understand what their risk profile is. Categorically, are they risky and more aggressive, or are they more kind of conservative in their underwriting and how they approach a market and what they're, there's a lot of other things to think about, but that's kind of how I would think about it for sure.
For sure. And I think that does help. And again, real estate is a great investment because it is tangible. You're able to go there, you're able to see it, you're able to touch it through it, which is great. Now, the other side of the coin that I want to ask now is, what should a company provide to a potential investor looking to prove that they're legitimate? Like, what should a firm be able to show? Say, hey, this is what I have, and this is the reason why I'm legitimate.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. You need to show data around where your numbers are coming from, right? Because again, it's all Excel based. So you can make Excel look really, really good if you tweak a few numbers, right? So we always use third-party property managers. Those are people that are on site managing the property day to day. We don't manage the properties ourselves because we're not experts in property management. right? So we find local third-party managers that's all they do, day in and day out. They manage real estate. We get multiple quotes from multiple vendors. So, we're not just relying on one quote or one vendor, especially if we're going into a newer market, because, we want to make sure that their numbers are different, because I've gotten pro formas or estimates from different PMs, and they're drastically different from a income and expenses perspective. So if you can show and explain to a potential passive investor, here's where the numbers came from, here's why we think the deal is great. You've got to pick markets that check a few boxes. One, population growth, job diversity. So you're not reliant on one employer, right? Because that employer goes out of business, or something happens, then your tenants are, and you're tied to that employer. You're not going to be able to pay rent. You're not going to increase rents, et cetera. And also job growth is still going in that market, right? So, you put a pin in Texas, you probably can check 90, all those boxes, right? But there are parts of like Alabama that are doing super well that I've never heard of, right? And so people think like, oh, if you invest in Miami or Dallas or Austin, it's going to be a great deal. There's deals in Austin that don't work as well as they thought. There's deals in Miami that don't work as well as they thought. But there's deals in Alabama or Arkansas or Kentucky or Indiana that are crushing it, but they're not as well known. So don't always just look at the shiny object and say, okay, well, I want to be in Atlanta because that's where everybody's going. If they're going there, that also means that prices are inflated. And so people are, there's, I think one deal that we put an offer in on, they got 26 offers and all of them were $2 million over the asking price. And that was just to get into the bidding. That was not even to win the deal. Like, so it's very, very competitive. And so that's why when you can find a syndicator that has track record, that's another thing. And that's why I joined this group also. So this is another piece of data that you want to share with investors is like, again, you're not investing in Justin. I'm not the sole person that is approving this deal as good. And I'm relying on other people in the group that have more experience than I do, that have done this a million times, have gone through market cycles, et cetera. They've vetted the underwriting, they've vetted the deal, they know who the people that found the deal are, and they're checking that box and saying, yep, I'm interested in this deal, I'm investing in it, I'm bringing it to my investors. So that's another, for me personally, that's a rubber stamp of, okay, this is good enough for me to look at. If somebody tells me like, hey, the main guy, his name's Mark, if Mark isn't in on the deal, I'm not going to look at it. I want Mark to have vetted the deal, have looked at it, he's investing in it, or he's bringing it to investors. So that for me is kind of a go, no go question that I ask all the syndicators that bring me deals to say, is he in it? If he's not at the moment, and I'll get to the point where I don't need to have Mark's rubber stamp because I'll have my own track record, but that's part of the reason why I joined this group was to trade on his track record and his kind of seal of approval and all that. So
yeah, I love it. I love it. Now, my final question to you now is like, do you allow like international people to invest in as well in these different deals?
Yeah, it's complicated. It's dependent. It's different by, I guess, location. I know we've had some people in the UK and Europe invest. It's really, it's down to also, you got to look at what your tax burden is, in your locale. Like I know people in Canada and Saskatoon, and I've told them about deals. And I think for them specifically, like they're entrepreneurs and their taxes will be hit or something. So you've got to look at the tax differences between investing in the US and investing outside, especially if you don't have like a US bank account and all that fun stuff. So the simple question is yes, it's just more complicated typically. And I would have to, talk to our lawyers about each specific situation. So you being in Canada, if you were like, hey, Justin, like what you said, I'd be interested in your next deal. Before we would get too far down the road, you would want to talk to your CPA. I would want to talk to the people in the group to say, okay, I got this person from Canada. They don't have a US bank account or whatever the case is. How do we get them involved? But I brought that topic up, and the simple answer is yes, it's doable. It's just there's a couple of things that we would want to check before pulling the trigger and all that fun stuff. So
for sure, I like that, and again, I'm pretty sure there's some people who that are going to watch this and are watching this now, are listening and be like, hey, you know what? I want to tap into what Justin has, down there. So there you have it. I want to thank you for taking the time to, share, sit down with me. It was a crazy morning.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, no worries.
yeah, but again, thank you so much. Do you have any socials that you would like to promote, or anything you want to share or shout out?
Yeah, I'm always on LinkedIn. So just check me out on LinkedIn. I do a lot of recruiting stuff there, obviously, and also real estate. Great Venture Capital is a recruiting firm. You can just find us at Great Venture Capital on Instagram.
Mhm.
We have a Facebook presence, but LinkedIn's kind of the best way to get me if you want to chat.
Awesome.
Also, my recruiting business is Hire Tomorrow. That has a LinkedIn page as well. So we can share this stuff, I think, in the show notes probably. But
Absolutely.
yeah. And I'll share my email as well. I'm always happy to chat with people about real estate.
Mhm.
One real quick last story. The one funny thing about kind of pivoting in 2019 and investing in real estate and having that mindset shift, all of our friends were the normal 9-to-5 W-2ers. And when we started talking about real estate, their eyes glazed over. They really had no idea what we were talking about. They had no interest in what we were talking about. So Alice and I were like, we got to find some real estate friends. And so we did. Luckily, there's a lot of meetups and things like that. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about real estate. It's a passion of mine. It's kind of, how we're building our wealth and all that fun stuff. So yeah, anybody wants to reach out just to learn more, happy to chat for sure.
Awesome. And I'll love to actually have you back onto the podcast, even talk about your recruitment firm, because
Yeah.
I'll get more into that as well. But I know time it's been far spent. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into the DHomer Real Estate Podcast. You can listen on all streaming platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. You can follow the podcast on the DHomer Real Estate Podcast, as well as TikTok at the DHomer Real Estate Podcast, Twitter, the DHomer Pod, and then you can follow me personally on IG and TikTok at DHomer Real Estate. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you guys enjoyed the rest of your day. Take care.